Just to confirm for the record, while we're on the lunch break, you did not speak with anyone about your testimony, did you?
I did not.
When we first started this morning and asking about the different programs that RIDEM implemented, okay?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering, I mean, it seemed like we were misunderstanding each other right before lunch, and then all of a sudden we stopped and went to lunch, and I was wondering if we could just back up to make sure I understood you correctly and you understood me correctly about the plans.
I think I'm okay, and your attorney can redirect you,
okay,
or if the board has questions.
Okay.
So I'm just going to kind of move on from there. When we started this morning and we put up the RIDEM advisory on the 6 different programs,
yes,
one of them was the air permit, correct?
Yes.
Right. And you had mentioned that in part of your rebuttal testimony there was some issues about ozone, correct?
Yes.
Right. Is Rhode Island in attainment for ozone?
I didn't check, sorry.
Okay. And is Rhode Island in the ozone transport region?
I didn't check.
And do you know what the ozone transport region is?
No.
All right, for the framework we had been going through on your rebuttal testimony, now on page 19, those 5 different categories that you had highlighted, your critique of the stormwater system, correct?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to move to page, on page 19, number 3, starting at line 2. Do you see that?
Yes.
There's no way you can get that up on the... Well, let me just read it. Page 19, line 2, number 3. The operation and management plan provides a table G3, page 11, of grass species to be used for ground cover, but 3 of the 4 species, tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, and perennial ryegrass, are currently considered invasive to natural systems and therefore inappropriate. That was your testimony and your SIR rebuttal, correct?
Yes.
All right. You have the stormwater, the Rhode Island Stormwater Design and Installation Standards Manual on the table there?
I do.
Okay. And I'd like to turn to Appendix B at page B15. Are you there yet?
No.
Okay, take your time. We will get it up on the screen also. It is on the screen if you wish.
Okay.
All right. So again, we're at the in the 2015 Stormwater Manual. And looking at section B.9.1.3, let me back this up. Let's look at the prior page, B14. No, I'm sorry. Back to page 15. B.9.1.3, where it says grasses.
Yes.
Do you see where it lists tall fescue and perennial ryegrass?
Yes.
And is that not part of section B9, Rhode Island LID practices, acceptable plant list?
It is.
So according to the Rhode Island DEM, 2 of these plants that you say are invasive are in fact plants that are acceptable to be used, correct?
Well, it was acceptable as of 2015.
Well, these are the current standards, are they not?
Yeah.
They haven't changed?
Not that I know.
All right, so and then if we turn to page B20, going to section B.9.4, open channel grasses. At the bottom, do you see where Kentucky bluegrass is listed?
Yes.
And again, that is a acceptable, part of the acceptable plant list from RIDEM, correct?
Correct.
And you consider these invasive despite what RIDEM says, correct?
Yeah, there are sources that have listed them as invasive to natural systems.
But not the Rhode Island regulatory scheme?
Apparently not.
Well, apparently not, or it's
No,
not?
apparently not, based on what we see here.
Did you review this list when you prepared your testimony?
No.
Going to item 4, then on page 19 of your SIR rebuttal testimony, talks about topsoils temporarily stockpiled on site are proposed to be reused after construction and final grading when the undeveloped portions of the site within the limits of disturbance are revegetated. This reuse would, in all likelihood, spread non-native invasive plants to other locations of the site where they currently do not occur. This is not acceptable. So this was something that was talked about yesterday with Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Reardon, correct?
Yes.
And so do you disagree with their position that since the soil is on the site already, that it is not going to be introducing any new non-native invasive plants onto the site?
I don't agree with them in the, it depends on how they worded that.
Well, this was your testimony.
So I stick by my testimony. I think that by stockpiling soil that may have propagules of invasive plants, and then you go and spread that soil around the site, where you may have just had a localized infestation of invasive species. Now you've kind of spread it across the site, and you've also given it a leg up on competition because all the soils are disturbed. And by their nature, these species tend to do very well in disturbed soil profiles.
This would tend to be true in many development scenarios,
Yes.
correct? Finally, I'd like to go to item 5, which is pollutant calculations. We spent some time on that yesterday from Mr. Jacobs' rebuttal testimony, which is Exhibit 48, and the pollution calculation summary tables. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you have that table in front of you?
No.
All right, you may not need it, so let's see where we can go with this. So, starting with still the Rhode Island Stormwater Manual, can you turn to Appendix H?
Yep. Got it.
Great. So again, generally, it's your opinion that even if RIDEM issues a stormwater permit, that there will be unacceptable harm to the environment?
Yes.
And is your recommendation really a no-build scenario?
Yes.
And talking about the pollutant loading, which is number 5 on page 19 of your rebuttal testimony, line 13, are your concerns about pollutant loading is that the currently proposed treatment system potentially do not meet minimum standard 3?
I have to read minimum standard 3.
Are you familiar with it?
Not enough to comment right now.
Let's go to have in your professional experience and before your testimony today, have you been familiar with minimum standard 3?
Yes.
What is it, generally?
It's improving water quality.
Let's go to section, let me find it myself here. Go to table H3, which is on page H17.
Okay.
And you see there, it's entitled Pollutant Removal Efficiency Rating Values for Water Quality BMPs, correct?
Yes.
And you know what BMPs are?
Best management practices.
Okay. And looking at all these acronyms again, the WVTS for the gravel WVTS, do you see that? It's in the second, in the first?
Yes.
Over there, okay.
Yep.
And can you read the pollutant removal efficiencies for gravel WVTS?
Yes. The pollutant removal efficiency for a gravel WVTS for total suspended solids is 86%. For total phosphorus, it's 53%. That's what the TP is. And total nitrogen, TN, is 55%. And bacteria is 85%.
And then going down to the bottom under the open channels for wet swale at the bottom of that chart,
Yes.
can you read those values also?
Yes. The median pollutant removal efficiency value for open channel wet swale for total suspended solids, the TSS, is 85%. For total phosphorus, TP, is 48%. And for total nitrogen, TN, is 30%. And bacteria is 60%.
And so these best management practices such as gravel, WVTS, and wet swale, these meet the pollutant reduction standards, correct?
These values here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And the plans that you reviewed that Mr. Reardon and Mr. Jacobs testified about also meet those standards, correct?
Yes. Apparently. But I wasn't commenting on the TSS, the phosphate, and the bacteria in my testimony.
And then based on these standards, though, and the ones that you have commented on, aren't the proposed, that Invenergy has proposed the best management practice are over-designed, essentially having a capacity to treat more than the minimum water quality volume?
That's what they claim, yeah.
Well, did you verify that at all?
No,
Not part of your scope of work?
correct.
Okay. In my own little outline, I had some different areas that I wanted to go through in terms of changes of plan. I want to just go through to make sure I'm correct about this. Since you first became involved, there have been changes to the plan. For example, the access road, correct?
Correct.
All right. And it's not unusual in any development to have these type of changes, true?
True.
Right. And we've already talked about the fact that you don't think that getting rid of the Woods Path as a paved retaining wall culverts is a relatively minor improvement to the project. Is that fair?
I believe I said that we neither wanted the use of that Woods Road or the new proposed temporary road. We wanted the use of the existing Algonquin Drive.
So even though those things be done to Woods Road, would you agree that it's an improved condition for the habitat in that area?
No, because it's both of them require the loss of mature forest cover.
I'm talking about Woods Road specifically.
Exactly.
All right, so no benefit.
Removal of use of Wood Road would require some clearing of forest, probably not as much as the temporary access road, but both of them would require removal of mature forest, whereas the use of existing Algonquin Drive for both construction and operation would not require the removal of forest cover.
And the existence of the current Algonquin Road, do you know how long it's been there?
I don't know.
But that's been there at least, well, it's been before stormwater controls. How about that? Because it was built without stormwater controls.
Okay, subject to check, sure.
Yeah.
I'll accept that.
That's about as far as I can go. It
Okay.
was built also, but it has no stormwater controls. And fair to say that the habitat in the area is adjusted to that roadway being there?
Well, I don't know if it's been adjusted. I haven't viewed any studies of the habitat before the compressor station was built and before that road was put in. So I have no way of being able to compare those two before and after scenarios.
And even though you disagree with the temporary access being built, you would agree that it's appropriate to put stormwater controls in there?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the areas of disturbance that you're aware of on the entire Spectra property? We were talking about the existence of Algonquin Lane being there, and you're aware of the Spectra compressor station also, right?
Yes, I'm aware of it. I've seen it when I was out there, yes.
Okay. And do you think that that should have never been built?
I do. I think that it should never, correct. I believe it should have never been built at that location.
And you're aware that the Spectra property is over 700 acres?
Yes,
And of that, Inventory will be acquiring only 67 acres?
that's what I read, yes.
And of that, only 30 acres will be the limits of disturbance, approximately?
Approximately, sure.
And then after restoration, it'll be about 20 acres impacted?
I didn't do that calculation, but sure, subject to check.
And again, some of the changes that have occurred since the plan first came in was a decrease in the amount of wetlands. Do you agree with that? Amount of wetlands impacted? Do you know?
Well, so the wetland plans, again, as I mentioned, that I looked at were the March 2017 plans. And so this is why I wanted to revisit that topic, because I don't know if we're understanding each other. Are you talking about a different set of plans that depict wetlands?
No, I'm talking about the overall project. So when you started looking at this in 2017, one of the things you did was you reviewed the application
Yes.
initially?
Yes.
And then you reviewed the wetlands application?
Right.
What, a year and a half or so later that was filed?
I think it was March
The application-
2017, something like that.
Application was October of 2015. The submission, I believe, was March of 2017.
2017, right. So those are the plans that I've seen.
All right. My question is, are you aware that there were changes in the design and layout and the impact to wetlands between the initial application to EFSB and then the submission to RIDEM?
I believe there was some changes that were told to me in regard to, I think, moving storage areas of hazardous material, swap in locations of detention basin, that kind of stuff.
The tank farm was moved from...
Yeah, the tank farm was moved, right.
Did you look at those change in the plans, or just...
No, from the 2017 stuff, I mean, that was the plan set that I was working off of, because that was the most current that I had.
Sure. And more complete than the initial set. Did you look or follow up with any of the submissions to DEM after that initial March date, March 17 date?
Yeah, there was some supplemental advisory, supplemental data requests and things like that.
Well, in terms of just the DEM application, if you went online, were you aware that revised plans were submitted in September of 27 to RIDEM?
September 27th,
2017.
2017. No, I wasn't aware.
All right. And were you aware that, again, when comments were returned to Invenergy, revised site plans were again resubmitted in December of 2017?
No, I mean, so I was, my scope was originally to review biodiversity, and initially there was another expert that was supposed to review the wetland stuff. So, you know, I looked at as much as I needed to understand the impacts to biodiversity. And so I haven't done a complete comprehensive review of every rendition of every wetland plan that was submitted prior to the 2017, and apparently there's another set that you referenced that I didn't see since March 2017.
All right, let me just finish up the line of questioning. You've been involved with freshwater wetlands applications for DEM. You've testified over your career, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that once you file it, you don't generally get your approval first time around. You get comments, you return the plans, and sometimes you may have 2 or 3 rounds of comments. Is that generally fair?
That's a fair statement.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'd be nice if we got the first round, but we usually don't, right? So in this case...
Depends on the magnitude and scale of the,
Right.
of the proposed action.
Absolutely. So in this case, the original application was filed in March of 2017. What I'm asking you now is, I understand that you looked at those plans, but then again, if you're online and look at it also, there were revised site plans in December of 2017. Did you review those?
I didn't, no.
There were revised plans that were submitted in March of 2018. Did you review those?
No.
And then once again, there were revised site plans submitted in June of 2018. Did you review those?
No.
You indicated that there was someone else who was going to testify about wetlands. Is that what you said?
Originally.
Okay.
I don't know if that's still true.
But now, as part of your, I think in your direct testimony, you had indicated that the wetland impact was going to be 2.4 acres on jurisdictional wetlands. Do you recall that in your written testimony?
I don't recall that, but subject to check.
Check myself to make sure. My question is, as you sit here today, Linda, it was page 3 of your direct testimony, starting at line 19, you state, I'll wait till, do you have that in front of you?
Page 3, you said?
Page 3 of your direct testimony.
Okay.
Starting at line 19.
Yes.
It says the project would permanently and adversely impact a majority of the habitats on the 67-acre site, including approximately 2.4 acres of wetlands. You see that?
Yes.
That was your testimony back in August of 2017.
Okay.
Do you know, or are you aware that in fact that number is smaller than that, to a point of about 1.1 acres of jurisdictional wetlands?
I believe it's smaller because now they're planning to use the new temporary road.
This is even before the road is put in. You're not aware of those numbers? The reduction of the 2.4?
No, those must have been from those subsequent plans that I didn't see.
You were here for Mr. Ringler's testimony?
Yes.
So what we've talked about, and you said you've done in your practice, is to avoid, get this right, avoid, minimize, and mitigate?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to the mitigation portion of this now. Are you familiar with the compensatory mitigation plan that was filed by Invenergy?
No, I haven't seen that.
Exhibit 93E, you have not reviewed that?
I have not.
All right. To the extent it deals with biodiversity in terms of mitigation, both off-site and on-site, would that not be something within your scope of work?
Yes, I should look at that. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go through it. Do you, can we get you a copy of Exhibit 93E, and we'll have it up on the board also?
Okay.
Okay. portion of Exhibit 93E is entitled Compensatory Mitigation Plan, Clear River Energy Center and Burville Interconnection Project. We can go to the next page after, on the screen after the exhibit. It's a couple pages in.
PDF page 16.
And if you can turn to, it's not numbered, but it's the first page prior to number 2, entitled Executive Summary.
Okay.
Let's start at the top, which says, the project proponent intends to satisfy the project's mitigation requirement primarily through the preservation of the Sweet Hill Farm mitigation site, restoration of the CREC construction staging area, and implementation of construction phase BMPs are also expected to offset unavoidable project-related wetlands impacts. Do you see that?
I do.
Is such mitigation off-site and on-site by restoration industry standard?
Well, typically, the preference by the Army Corps of Engineers has been on-site in-kind mitigation. When that can't be met, they start to look at off-site in-kind, and when that can't be met, then they start to look at off-site out-of-kind.
And then going on to the next line, it says, the overall goal is to provide no net loss of existing wetland functional values and statutory interests within the affected watersheds through the preservation, restoration, enhancement, and/or creation of wetlands, correct? Do you see that?
Yes. Yep.
Do you agree with that?
Whose goal are they talking about?
I gotta get my glasses, I'm sorry.
Oh, in compensatory mitigation, I'm assuming an Army Corps
Yes.
goal? Yeah,
Okay.
correct. No net loss, yes.
Okay. All right, let's move on then to page 3. And I think I want to take a time to read that second paragraph that starts the final compensatory mitigation rule. I recognize you haven't seen this, so do you want to take a moment and read that paragraph?
Yes.
And that first portion is fairly consistent with what you said about a preference of hierarchy of mitigation, identifies mitigation banks and lieu and free credits as the most preferred option, and then permanently responsible mitigations the third most preferable option. But you understand that that's all we have in Rhode Island?
Yes.
Okay. And then at the end it talks about...
Currently.
Currently.
Yeah, but there's talks of changing that.
Good. Are you involved in that?
No.
At the end of that paragraph where it says, 3 scenarios for permittee responsible mitigation are possible in order of preference. 1, conducted under a watershed approach. 2, on-site and in-kind. And 3, off-site, out-of-kind. Is that similar to what you've just testified to?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the conducted under watershed approach. I'd have to check the 2016 wetland mitigation compliance guidance document to see what it says about that.
Can you tell me again, what is that document that you just referenced?
The Army Corps of Engineers 2016 wetland mitigation compliance guidance document.
Go on down to the last paragraph.
Oh, they reference it on the next paragraph. 2016. NED stands for New England District
Okay.
Compensatory Mitigation Guidance.
All right. Then going to the last paragraph, it says, in providing compensatory mitigation, the overall goal is to provide no net loss of existing wetland functional values and statutory interests within the affected watersheds through the preservation, restoration, enhancement, and/or creation of wetlands. Do you agree with that statement of the overall goal?
Yeah, when they say overall goal, that means the overall program.
Sure.
You know, on a case-by-case basis, you often can't replace the functions and values that were lost.
But here we're still in section 1.0, the introduction.
Yeah.
Okay, just kind of walking you through this. Now, going to the next page, you'll see where it starts 2.0, Sweet Hill Farm Mitigation Site.
Yes.
I'd like to go to the paragraph right before that, the last line. It says, the project proponent intends to satisfy this mitigation requirement primarily through the preservation of the Sweet Hill Farm Mitigation Site, which is section 2.0, restoration of the correct construction staging area, section 3.0, and implementation of construction phase best management practices, BMP, section 4.0, are also expected to help offset unavoidable project-related impacts. Does that approach seem reasonable to you overall, as based upon your experience?
I know nothing about the Sweet Hill Farm Mitigation Site. I'd have to see a biological survey of that site. Was one done that I'm not aware of?
Well, let's go through and we'll go through this.
Okay.
So let's talk about the Sweet Hill Farm site. Section 2.2 says the Sweet Hill Farm site, Assessor's Plat 144, Lot 19. It's an approximately 150-acre privately owned parcel located on East Avenue, Route 107, in the town of Burrillville, Rhode Island, Figure 1. I know you don't know anything about it, but it's 150 acres, okay?
Okay.
Now let's go to the next one where it talks about adjacency to protected open space. And are you familiar with this area where it talks about the Black Hut management area?
Not in any great detail. I've traveled some of those roads in that area. I have a general feel of the landscape, but not the detail.
The first line though says the site is located adjacent to the Black Hut management area, 1,853 acre tract of state-owned conservation land in the town of Burrillville. And going down to the last line on page 4, the Sweet Hill Farm site represents the single largest unprotected parcel adjacent to the Black Hut management area within the bounds of these roadways. Within the scope of your work, is it relevant for you to discuss the protection of the single largest unprotected parcel for mitigation purposes?
It would depend on what kind of resources are on that property.
And you know, you have not done any investigation on this property, obviously.
I have not.
So section 2.2.2 talks about ecological communities classification.
Okay.
And what I'd like to go on next to is 2.2.3 wetlands, waterways, and vernal pools. And it says wetlands at the site, it's on page 5 at the bottom, were delineated in the field by Natural Resource Services at some point prior to 2004. The wetland delineation indicates the presence of forested wetland habitats in the southern, eastern, and central portions of the site, some of which border low gradient intermittent streams which flow off the site to the east. Does that begin to help you get some context of this property?
I think I lost where you were reading.
Sorry, on page 5 at the bottom,
Okay.
section 2.2.3,
Yep.
wetlands, waterways, and vernal pools. It just mentions that, it says that Natural Resource Services did the wetlands delineation and found forested wetland habitats on the site.
Okay.
And also, as you go further on, it says that approximately 19 acres of forested wetlands are delineated at the site, representing 12.8% of total site acreage. You see that?
Yep.
And understanding you may not be aware of the quality of those wetlands, it is certainly in excess of the 1 acre or even the 2.4 from an earlier number that's being disturbed as part of the site, correct?
Correct.
And it does talk about vernal pools. Can you tell me about vernal pools and their relevance?
Sure, what do you want to know about?
What are they?
So vernal pools are seasonal pools. The word vernal may or may not be accurate to all these types of seasonal pools. So vernal refers to springtime, and the implication of that name is snow melt in the spring is what fills these pools up. But some of them may be temporary pools due to autumnal rains. But regardless, they are temporary pools. They do not maintain surface water throughout the entire year. They have a hydro period. That means the amount of standing water time period. They have a hydro period of usually 2 to 3 months, or a little more. And by summertime, they are dry. They are important habitats because they are little micro ecosystems in and of themselves. There are types of animals that rely on these ephemeral pools to complete their life histories. There are both vertebrate and invertebrate animals that rely on these pools, and without these special types of pools, we would lose these species that depend on them, and these are called obligate vernal pool species.
Thank you. On page 6, in paragraph, well, the second full paragraph that starts ESS used,
Yes.
it says ESS used the Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program guidelines for the certification of vernal pool habitat to identify vernal pools at the site. Rhode Island has no established guidelines for identifying vernal pools. 2 questions on the first part of the sentence. Are you familiar with the Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program?
Yes.
Okay. And
but not their certification process for vernal pool habitat.
but you're aware that Rhode Island has no established guidelines.
Correct.
Going down a few more lines, about midway through where it says figure 1, and then it says, oh, I'm sorry, before that, it says, using these criteria, ESS identified, you see that?
Yes.
At least 3 vernal pools, special aquatic sites. So those are like the SAS 1 and 2 that we talked about on the project site, correct?
Correct. That's Rhode Island's terminology for these quote vernal pools. Okay.
So ESS identified at least 3 vernal pools on the property during the field assessment in April 2018, figure 4. 1 small vernal pool was located in a pine hemlock grove near the southeastern corner of the site near East Avenue. Approximately 10 wood frog egg masses were identified in this vernal pool. You see that?
Yes.
And then a second large vernal pool located in mixed forest habitat was identified near the northeastern corner of the site. Approximately 20 wood frog and approximately 12 spotted salamander, I'm not even going to try the Latin.
Vistum immaculatum.
Thank you. Egg masses were identified in this vernal pool, and wood frogs were heard vocalizing in and around the vernal pool. See that?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, a third vernal pool was identified in the southern portion of the site, northwest of the residential properties on East Avenue. Multiple wood frog and spotted salamander egg masses were identified in this vernal pool, and wood frogs were heard vocalizing in and around the pool. At least 1 additional vernal pool may be located in this vicinity, as wood frogs were also heard vocalizing to the east from this location. So now you've had a little bit of idea of what's out there on the site, and based on your experience with mitigation, are these some appropriate compensatory mitigation sites?
No, because Rhode Island wetland law would protect these sites as well, so they shouldn't be disturbed as it is. So you're not really providing compensatory loss for the pools that will be destroyed on the Clear River Energy site.
Well, we'll get through to what type of property this is as we go further on into it. But essentially, these spots would be subject to the same rules that we're talking about now, such that if there was an application to alter wetlands, perhaps they could be altered as part of that permitting process, could they not?
They could, and
So
they'd be subject to the same types of mitigation requirements and permitting process. Yeah.
So if you were to take this 150-acre site and put it under conservation, it would remove that possibility going forward, would it not?
It would depend on what you mean by put it under conservation. Yeah, if there was the proper protections in place, meaning if there was a deed restriction that prevented any type of threat of development.
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers would be overseeing this process, correct? As part of the compensatory mitigation?
Well, yeah, well, my point is the Army Corps may not see this as compensatory mitigation because you're not replacing the lost footprint and the lost pools.
Well,
I mean, these already exist at this site.
I understand.
Yeah.
But you indicated that you had reviewed the freshwater wetlands application, but you never looked at this portion of the application that contained the mitigation, did you?
This was part of this. This is dated 2018. So what I reviewed was the application from 2017.
But you didn't review the supplemental ones that had been filed in 2018. You told me you didn't view.
Correct. I reviewed what I was given, and that was the March 2017 application.
And no one gave you this compensatory mitigation plan to look at?
Correct.
And you didn't see it as part of the wetlands application after it had been filed?
Correct.
Let's go to vegetation at 2.2.4 on page 6. It says on the vegetation, 2.2.4 vegetation, on page 6, it starts off with the primary vegetative communities on the site are forested upland, including deciduous forest, coniferous forest, and mixed deciduous coniferous forest, deciduous forested wetland, and to a lesser extent early successional meadow shrubland. Primary plant species documented in the forested upland habitats at the site include, I'm not going to read those, but can you take a few moments and look through those?
Sure.
On page 7.
You want me to read them?
Not out loud, why don't you
Okay.
just take a look. The stenographer will kill us.
Okay. Okay.
And again, I know you're reading this for the first time, but does that give you some idea of what is out there on the site?
Yeah, it gives me an idea of composition.
And again, this now is forested upland. It talks about that in the wetland area, but as we've talked about before, all of this wetland area that's, strike that, all of the upland area that's been described, absent any federal or state listed species, there are no regulations governing development of that.
Absence of any federal listed species, yes. And the two protected species with the P designation on the state level.
You, in one response to one of my questions, you said that you reviewed what you were given. Who provided you with the documents to review as part of this entire proceeding?
So everything goes through my client, CDR McGuire. However, ultimately we're all working for the town of Burrillville. So sometimes the town's council, Attorney McElroy, will give me something to review. Sometimes the town manager, Michael Wood, will give me something to review. And sometimes CDR's engineer, James Jackson, will give me something to review.
The next section is 2.2.5, topography and soils on page 7. I'm not going to read that through the record. Would it assist your analysis of the mitigation discussion to review that?
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yep, I can blast through that pretty quickly. Okay.
Okay. Any comment on that? I don't have any questions for you.
No.
Going to section 2.2.6, other habitat features on page 8. It says approximately 129 acres, 88% of the site is mapped as part of an unfragmented forest block greater than 500 acres in size per the 2015 Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan, figure 6. I'm going to ask if we can put up that figure 6, please. You understand what an unfragmented forest block greater than 500 acres is, correct?
I do.
And you're familiar with the 2015 Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan?
Yes.
Okay. Figure 6 in this. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, you haven't seen this before, have you?
No.
All right, this is a couple pages in on this same report, and I'll represent to you, and I think people will disagree. Highlighted in the red, if you want to go a few pages in, and you can get a figure.
Okay.
Figure 6. The area highlighted in red is identified by the legend as the Sweet Hill Farm property. You see that?
I do.
Right. And then the area in green is that Black Hut management area. See that?
Okay.
So this is sort of a kind of a wedge piece that rounds out that Black Hut management area. Do you see that?
Yes.
And from your, I know you haven't been on the site, but from your position and your scope of work about biodiversity, do you see that it would be beneficial to have this parcel put under a conservation easement and make it a part of this larger unfragmented forest?
Again, I can't make that conclusion until I see the resources on the site.
Just reading, continuing on page 8, where I left off on figure 6, it says the unfragmented forest block of which the site is a part is approximately 780 acres in size and includes most of the Black Hut management area and other surrounding lands. Thus, the portion of the unfragmented forest block located on the site represents approximately 16% of the total size of this forest block.
That's just what they referred to.
Now, yesterday, we spent some time talking about natural heritage areas. You recall that?
I do.
All right. The next line in this report from 2018 says there are no mapped natural heritage areas present at the site. However, as a privately owned parcel, the presence of a mapped natural heritage area would not be expected. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so it would be up to whomever had come across a listed species to submit a form to the Natural Heritage Program with evidence that they found that species. Typically, private landowners don't do that, and it's not a conscious decision not to do that. A lot of them just don't know about the program. So
No need for them to do it unless...
they wouldn't think to do that unless people are actively reaching out to them and asking to conduct surveys on their property.
Or alternatively, if they were looking to develop the property.
Perhaps, yeah.
And then to finish off the last paragraph there, it says, the site is partially located within an area identified by the Nature Conservancy as a corridor allowing for the gradual movement of animal and plant populations in response to changes in climate. You see that?
I did.
Did you review any of the testimony provided by the Nature Conservancy in this proceeding as part of your testimony?
No, we're trying not to duplicate efforts.
And let's go to the next section, 2.2.7, wildlife community. And it starts off, we're on page 8. It says, based upon the desktop habitat assessment and subsequent initial site visit, habitats at the site appear to support a wildlife community typical of that of mixed forest sites in southern New England. The variety of habitat types on the property, including forested wetlands, mixed upland forest, high elevation pine forest, and early successional field/shrublands, provide for a robust wildlife community to persist at the site. Key habitat features were also noted at the site, including multiple vernal pools, snags, tree cavities, wildlife food plants, shrub thickets along streams, large woody debris on the ground, rock piles, and walls. These features provide important habitat components for a variety of bird, mammal, reptile, and amphibian species. In looking at that, I think ESS acknowledges that it is not, a survey, a biological assessment survey. Would you recommend, or in your practice, would you suggest that such a survey be done?
If you're going to compare the impacts that are imminent on the Clear River Energy site and argue that you're going to offset those impacts by buying other parcel elsewhere, you would also need to do the full biological surveys that were done at least to the level of detail as the project site, so that you could compare apples to apples. As it stands, unless you're telling me there was a biological survey done similar to what was done at Clear River Energy Center, I can't make a conclusion.
Right. Not asking you to, but
Okay.
I'm just pointing that out. If you can you just read to the end of page 8 and the top of page 9, it just describes what's seen out there.
Sure. During the site visit.
Oh, no, to yourself.
Oh, sorry.
Again, we'll save the stenographer. Just to the top of page
Yep.
9,
Okay.
that first section. I just want to go back to a few things, and this is you're the expert in this area, not myself, but it talks in that second to last paragraph at the bottom, it says pileated woodpecker, Hylotomus pileatus, a Rhode Island species of concern. Was that also present on the CREC site?
It was.
Right. And on the next line where it talks about the wood frog, that was on the CREC site,
Yes.
as well as the spotted salamander?
Yes.
All right. Anything else on that list that you want to raise with us?
Okay, so they talk about 12 bird species. I think there's been 172 bird species identified at Black Hut.
Oh,
So this is kind of like a sparse list. I can't really do anything with this list. Basically,
and well, if we go to the... Oh, sorry.
yeah. So basically the species they list: song sparrow, American robin, American goldfinch, black-capped chickadee, eastern phoebe, red-bellied woodpecker, white-breasted nuthatch, tufted titmouse, blue jay, northern flicker. I'd expect to see those in downtown Providence.
Okay, all right. But then if we look at the top of page 9, ESS states, it's important to note that the species list presented above represents only incidental observations made over the course of one field assessment. In addition, given the date of the site visit, which was April 13th, 2018, the presence of most neotropical migratory bird species would not be expected. So it's fair to say that ESS recognizes the limitations of their one visit.
Okay, but this is dated June 11th, 2018, after which most of the neotropical migrants would have passed through. So,
Isn't that what they say? Is that what ESS says?
yeah, so I don't know why they didn't just include that information if they had a chance to provide it.
We'll go to section 2.2.8 on page 9. Talks about historical and cultural resources, some of which we also spoke about yesterday. And it talks, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, where it says, a 2010 report produced by the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission and the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor Commission identifies Sweet Hill Farm as one of the 5 priority heritage landscapes selected by residents of the town in 2010 as highly valued by the community, contributing to the character of the community, and lacking permanent protection or preservation. Do any of those 3 factors impact on you as an ecologist in assessing the site?
I can't comment on that because I'm not a cultural resource expert, and I haven't reviewed any cultural resource reports of either site.
And then going down where it says, right after that, with regard to preserving the Sweet Hill Farm site, the report also states that residents value the undeveloped frontage of the property, which lies along a primary travelway between the village of Harrisville and other areas in town. The next bullet, the site is an important open space resource that features connectivity with Black Hut Management Area and Spring Lake, and many residents would like the site to remain as open space. Next bullet, the property owner is interested in exploring development options for the site. And finally, RIDEM has expressed interest in acquiring the site but could not reach an agreement with the landowner on purchase price. And again, are any of these relevant to your analysis for compensatory mitigation?
Not beyond the fact that there's a claim that there is a threat of development on the site.
And why is that important?
It might be important. Again, it depends on what the resources are on the site, which I don't know, so I can't comment.
Fair enough. The next section is recreational value. I'm going to move on to development potential unless you want to look at that.
I'm not a recreational expert.
Okay. We had someone from DEM talking.
Except for in terms of my sport, bird watching.
Okay. Although I did notice you were also certified for a boat. What was your boat certification?
Oh, boat safety, boating safety, yeah.
We got that too.
Is that competitive bird watching?
No. Okay, that's pastime, I guess, as opposed to a sport, sorry.
Okay. You did indicate before, though, that development options might be relevant. So let's go to 2.2.10 at page 10, development potential. And just to the last, starting with that end of the first paragraph, based on the following factors, development of the site appears to be feasible. The bullets read down, the wetland delineation conducted at the site indicates that 87% of the site is upland. Is that relevant to you?
Assuming that that's an accurate figure, yes, it's relevant, and that I think the point they're making here is that there's it could be attracted to development, so sure, I agree.
And then it also says that over 91% of the site is comprised of soil map units considered well suited for development and installation of septic systems. And is it fair to say that that increases the development potential to have those type of soils on the property?
It depends on if those mapped soil units are accurate, because there's a big disparity, sorry,
I know.
among soil mapping and when it was done and who did it. Some that tend to be very accurate, others not so. And sometimes, in fairness to the soil scientists, they didn't have permission to be on the property, didn't have access, so it was assessed from a landform point of view, and they did the best they could. So you always need to field truth it and verify if that's the case.
Trust but verify, huh?
Right.
You heard me earlier when I said that Natural Resource Services had done some of the earlier site work out there.
Natural Resource Services?
Yeah, are you familiar with them?
Oh, you're referring to a consulting firm?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Scott Ravideau, are you familiar with this entity?
I'm not, no.
Okay. The next bullet says that the site has over 3,200 feet of frontage on East Avenue, which provides ample opportunity for configuring access to a potential internal road system. This would mean potentially residential development.
Okay.
The site has very limited areas of bedrock ledge. Groundwater is likely suitable for development of domestic wells, and the site is zoned as farming residential. So from your position as an ecologist and looking at compensatory mitigation, are these relevant factors to consider when you want to conserve a site and get it out of development?
It depends on how imminent the threat is. So typically, when that case is made, we look at market values in the area, we look at demand, we look at history of development, recent history of development in the area and which way markets are going, which way urban sprawl is heading, and where the job creation is, where transportation improvements are, as the younger population tends to look for areas serviced by mass transit, the projected development areas change, things like that.
I appreciate that. But looking at this also, it was, in addition, it was done, an analysis was done by Dupree Engineering. Are you familiar with Dupree?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Okay. Yes. Although you can.
Capri?
Dupree Engineering?
How do you spell it?
D-I-P-R-E-T-E?
Oh, Dupree? No.
Dupree, okay. Dupree Engineering had done this for a potential solar energy facility developer, and that last bullet says, the site is zoned as farming residential. Net metering solar photovoltaic installations are allowed in all zoning districts in Burrville. So this could potentially be a solar development.
Okay.
And that would require deforestation, correct?
Yes.
And are you supportive of that?
Supportive of deforestation or supportive of solar voltaic
Are
cells?
you supportive of deforestation of a parcel for net metering solar?
Again, it would depend on the resources on the site. If I went out there and saw that most of the understory is dominated by invasive species and there's no listed species of concern, and it would offset a demand for a fossil fuel burning plant, then I would probably be for it.
But when we talked about on page 9, where RIDEM has expressed interest in acquiring the site, does that lead you to have any inkling that perhaps it has value, conservation value?
Well, it depends on what their goals and objectives are. If it's for hunting rabbits, I don't know what that really does for the ecology, especially considering all the species that would be lost and completely obliterated from the Clear River Energy site.
Just going back quickly to the solar installations, I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you might not be opposed to that if it would offset having a fossil fuel plant. Is that fair?
Yes.
Are you opposed to fossil fuel plants?
When they are sited in an area that has a multitude of threatened and endangered and special concern species, and apparently some of the most biologically diverse and valuable property in the entire state, I'd be opposed to it, yes.
And yet you reach that opinion that this is the most valuable almost in the state?
Well, I'll tell you, in my 30 years of working as an ecologist, I've never had a site where we've had 17 listed species and 48 species of greatest conservation need. I mean, that was remarkable to me.
And yet at this point, no one has, strike that. Let's go to the proposed preservation and management plan, 2.3. Just to address it, the top bullet point indicates that it would be placing conservation easement on the parcel to preserve the property as conservation land in perpetuity. You're familiar with that type of conservation easement, are you not?
Yes.
All right. And if this was, oh, I'm sorry, page 11? Okay. And you're familiar with that type of conservation easement?
Yes.
And for a compensatory mitigation parcel, that would be appropriate, correct?
It'd be required.
The next section then is section 3.0, the staging area restoration plan. You didn't review this, did you?
Yeah, it's on the March 2017 plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so while you disagree with the need, I'm sure, to get to the point of a restoration, do you have any comments or disagreements with the restoration plan itself?
Well, I don't think anyone has still explained to me why they need a construction laydown site on the property, why it can't be off-site, why they need to destroy even more valuable forested habitat just for the convenience of being able to move their equipment around.
Well, isn't the alternative then you increase the traffic on the local roads?
Could be.
And that's also, if you haven't been at these hearings, traffic, you were at the hearings when the traffic was an issue, correct?
It could be, because if they had an off-site laydown area, maybe some of the stuff, maybe they'd have room for some of the stuff on-site and some of the other stuff off-site, and therefore they wouldn't need to destroy additional forest.
You are aware that there are also off-sites that are being proposed, correct?
I didn't know.
Yeah, there are off-site ones, so
Good.
that is good, right?
That is good.
And again, my question was, aside from the need for the restoration, and I understand your position on that, you've made that very clear, do you have any disagreement with how the restoration plan is set forward?
Okay, could you just repeat that one last time? I just want to make sure I understand you.
I'll rephrase it. I understand that you don't believe a laydown site should be used.
Right.
And therefore, under your scenario, also there should not be a plant built, therefore we need no restoration. I got that.
Okay.
I think we all do. My question to you, though, is assuming that if this is permitted and built and we do need to do restoration, is this restoration plan acceptable?
Generally speaking, yes, because it aims to restore, eventually restore, not in our lifetime, but eventually will restore a forest. So presumably, and assuming everything survives, that it's maintained and monitored, eventually someday, when we're all along, maybe our kids might see it, maybe our grandkids might see a forest there again.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned monitoring and what takes place. Let's turn to the next page, on page 13, entitled 3.3, monitoring.
Okay.
And that first sentence on 3.3, on page 13, I'll just wait till I pull it up, there it is. It says, regular monitoring of the restoration areas will be necessary to ensure that the restoration is meeting the performance standards and to determine whether adaptive management strategies are needed to promote the accomplishment of performance standards. You see that?
Yes.
And isn't it industry standard and also required by RIDEM permitting to have ongoing monitoring?
I'm not sure what RIDEM says about monitoring, but it's when you're talking about restoration plans for Army Corps of Engineers and restoring lost wetlands, it is required to have monitoring for multiple years. Typically, it is 5 years of monitoring, not successive, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, but 5 years, be it in year 1, or, well, usually they don't do it the first year because they let things try and get established, but maybe, perhaps like they have here, year 2, year 3, year 5, year 10.
Right. So in this instance, in fact, this one
Kind of mimics that, yeah.
indicates going out 10 years for monitoring.
Yeah.
And then just to round it out on page 14, section 4.0, just talks about construction BMPs. And these would be the best management practices that would be in place during on-site during the construction phase, correct?
Oh, we skipped over adaptive management?
We can talk about adaptive management. You want to do that? You're right, I did. So it talks 3.4, adaptive management. Certain adaptive management strategies may need to be implemented at restored areas. And then table 6 talks about planned responses to potential restoration deficiencies. Do you want to take a moment and read through that?
Yes, please.